The rain pelted against the windows of the taxi, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon yellow and red. Chantal leaned her head against the cool glass, closing her eyes for just a moment. It had been the longest 6 months of her life. She had just finished a massive project at the firm, the kind of work that demanded sleepless nights, skipped meals, and enough coffee to kill a small horse. All she wanted now was silence. She didn't want to answer emails. She didn't want to think about quarterly targets. And she definitely didn't want to talk to another human being for at least 48 hours. The taxi driver pulled up to the curb of the Grandview Hotel. It was an old building, but it had been renovated recently to look modern and sleek. The doorman was standing under an awning, holding a giant black umbrella. Chantal paid the driver, stepped out into the damp night air, and took a deep breath. It smelled like rain and wet pavement. It was a good smell. It washed away the stale air of the office. She walked into the lobby, and the sudden warmth hit her face. Inside, it was quiet. There was soft jazz playing from invisible speakers somewhere in the ceiling, and the air smelled faintly of vanilla and expensive wood polish. A young woman stood behind the long marble check-in counter. She had a bright, polished smile that looked a little too practiced, but Chantal was too tired to care about fake smiles. She just needed a key. Checking in, Chantal said, placing her credit card and ID on the counter. The clerk took the cards, her fingernails tapping rhythmically on the keyboard. Welcome to the Grandview. We have you in a deluxe king room on the 12th floor. Non-smoking, high floor, quiet zone. Is that correct? That sounds perfect, Chantal said. Quiet is exactly what I need. The clerk typed a few more things, sliding a key card across the smooth surface. Here you go. Room 1204. The elevators are just to your right. Breakfast is served until 10 in the morning. Do you need any help with your bags? No, I'm good, Chantal said, grabbing the handle of her small suitcase. Just the one bag. She walked toward the elevators, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. She pressed the button and waited. In the reflection of the polished brass doors, she caught sight of herself. She looked tired. Her usually neat hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She straightened her blazer, trying to shake off the feeling of exhaustion. This weekend was about resetting. She was going to order a massive burger, take a hot bath, and sleep for 12 hours straight. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. It was empty. Chantal stepped inside, pressed the button for 12. And watched the numbers light up as the car began to rise. When the doors opened on her floor, the silence was even deeper. The hallway was carpeted in a thick, gray pattern that swallowed the sound of her footsteps. The lights were dimmed, creating a moody, calm atmosphere. She found room 1204 easily. She slid the keycard into the slot, heard the little click, and pushed the heavy door open. The room was beautiful. It wasn't huge, but it felt spacious. There was a large bed with way too many pillows, a desk in the corner, and a window that stretched from floor to ceiling. Chantal dropped her suitcase on the luggage rack and walked over to the window. She was 12 stories up. Below her, the city traffic moved like slow-moving toys. Red taillights and white headlights flowed along the streets. She felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Up here, nobody knew who she was. She wasn't the manager. She wasn't the problem solver. She wasn't the one who had to fix everything when things went wrong. She was just a person in a room. She turned away from the window and kicked off her heels. Her feet sighed in relief. She took off her blazer and hung it in the closet, then unbuttoned the top button of her shirt. She felt human again. Her stomach gave a loud growl, reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything since a stale granola bar at noon. She grabbed the room service menu from the desk and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was firm but soft, the kind that immediately makes you want to lie down and never get up. She scanned the menu. They had a cheeseburger, cooked medium with truffle fries. It was expensive, probably double what it should cost, but she didn't care. She deserved it. She picked up the phone and dialed room service. A man answered on the second ring. Room service, he said. Hi, this is room 1204, Chantal said. I'd like to order the gourmet cheeseburger and a side of truffle fries. "And a bottle of sparkling water, please." "Very good, ma'am," the man said. His voice was professional and quick. "Anything else?" "That's all. Thank you. It should be up in about 30 minutes. Chantal hung up the phone. 30 minutes. That gave her just enough time to take a quick shower. The hot water would help her muscles relax. She felt a knot of tension between her shoulder blades that had been there for weeks. She went into the bathroom. It was all marble and glass, with big white towels stacked perfectly on a shelf. She turned on the water, letting it run until steam began to fog up the mirror. She brushed her teeth while she waited, staring at her reflection. The dark circles were still there. She looked a little better now that she was inside the quiet room. She undressed and stepped into the shower. The water was hot, almost stinging, but it felt amazing. She stood under the spray, letting it run over her hair and down her back. She closed her eyes and just breathed. For the first time in a long time, her mind was blank. She wasn't thinking about the budget or the client meeting or the angry email she received on Friday. It was just the sound of the water and the smell of the hotel soap. She lost track of time. She probably stood there for 15 minutes, just letting the water wash away the stress. When she finally turned off the faucet, the bathroom was thick with steam. She stepped out onto the bath mat and wrapped herself in one of the fluffy white robes provided by the hotel. It felt like a warm hug. She wiped a circle in the foggy mirror so she could see her face. Her skin was pink from the heat. She felt clean. She felt light. She walked back into the main room, expecting to maybe see the tray sitting outside the door or a knock to signal that the food had arrived. But the room was empty. The hallway was silent. She looked at the clock on the nightstand. It had been about 20 minutes since she ordered. Just a few more minutes, she whispered to herself. She sat down in the armchair by the window, tucking her legs up underneath her. She picked up her phone to scroll through social media, something she rarely had time for during the workday. She liked a few photos of her cousin's new baby, watched a short video of a cat jumping into a box and smiled. It felt nice to do nothing. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The food still wasn't there. Chantal frowned. It usually didn't take this long. She was about to pick up the phone to call room service again when she heard a sound in the hallway. It wasn't a knock. It was a heavy thud, like something dropping. Then footsteps. Not the soft, careful steps of a guest trying not to wake neighbors, but loud, rhythmic thumping, like boots. Chantal lowered her phone, her heart rate picking up slightly. The footsteps stopped right outside her door. She waited for a knock, a room service or something, but there was nothing. Just silence. Maybe they went to the wrong room, she thought. It happens. She stood up, tightening the belt on her robe. She walked quietly toward the door, intending to look through the peephole. But before she could reach it, the sound came again. Voices. Low, urgent voices. Not the polite chatter of hotel staff. She froze. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. She put her hand on the door handle, but she didn't turn it. She leaned forward, pressing her ear against the cold wood of the door. "Check the number again," a deep voice said from the other side. 1204. Another voice answered. "This is it." Chantal felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She looked back at her phone, debating whether to call the front desk or 911. Something felt wrong. The atmosphere in the hallway had shifted from calm to dangerous in a split second. She took a step back from the door, her mind racing. She should call. She should definitely call. But as she reached for the phone on the nightstand, the silence in the hallway shattered. There was no knock. There was no open up. Instead, there was a loud crash, a splintering sound of wood breaking as the door was forced open with a single, violent blow. The door flew inward, hitting the wall with a bang that shook the pictures. Chantal screamed. The heavy wooden door didn't just open. It exploded inward. The sound was like a crack of thunder that shook the walls, the dead lock snapping like a dry twig. Splinters of wood flew across the room, landing on the carpet like jagged confetti. Before Chantal could even scream, the space was filled with men. They poured through the doorway like a flood, 3 of them moving with terrifying speed. They weren't wearing hotel uniforms. They were dressed in dark tactical vests, heavy boots, and guns big. Black rifles that were pointed directly at her chest. "Police, get down. Get on the ground now," one of them roared. His voice was so loud it felt like a physical blow. Chantal's heart stopped, then hammered against her ribs so hard it hurt. She was frozen in place, her hands still hovering near the phone on the nightstand. Her brain couldn't process what she was seeing. This was a hotel room, a safe place. She was on vacation. This kind of thing only happened on the news. Not to her. Not here. I said, "Get down." The officer screamed again, stepping closer. The red laser sight from his weapon danced across the white robe she was wearing. Landing right over her heart, instinct took over. Chantal let out a cry and dropped to her knees. The carpet was rough against her skin, but she barely felt it. She scrambled to lay flat, pressing her cheek against the floor. Putting her hands behind her head exactly like she had seen in movies. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the pain, waiting for the bullets. She was sure she was going to die. "Don't shoot. Please don't shoot." She sobbed, her voice muffled by the carpet. "Keep your hands visible. Do not move." Another voice barked. It was deeper, angrier. She could hear them moving around the room. Heavy boots thudding on the floor, drawers being yanked open and slammed shut, the closet doors being ripped off their tracks. The sounds of violence were everywhere, destroying the peaceful sanctuary she had built just 20 minutes ago. "Clear the bathroom." Someone shouted, "Clear the bed." A heavy hand grabbed Chantal's arm and yanked it behind her back. She cried out as cold metal bit into her wrist. Click, click. The handcuffs were ratcheted on tight, pinching her skin. They were on so tight that her fingers immediately started to tingle. "Roll over. Sit up." Chantal struggled to push herself up, the robe twisting around her legs. She managed to sit, hunched over on the floor, her hands cuffed behind her back. She looked up, tears streaming down her face, blurring her vision. The first officer, a tall man with a thick mustache, was standing over her. He kept his gun pointed at her face, his finger resting right on the trigger. "Where are they?" he demanded, his chest heaving. "Where's the rest of it?" "What?" Chantal stammered, her voice shaking so badly she could barely speak. "Where is who?" "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play games with me." The officer spat, stepping closer. "We know you're running a running of operation here. Where are the men? Where are the packages?" "I'm alone," she cried, the confusion mixing with terror. "It's just me. I'm here for a weekend trip. I checked in an hour ago." The officer looked at her with pure disgust. He didn't believe her. He looked at the open suitcase on the rack, which contained nothing but clean clothes and toiletries. He looked at the small desk where her laptop sat closed. "Search the mattress." He barked at one of the other officers. "Check the vents. Tear this place apart." The third officer walked over to the minibar and smashed the glass door with the butt of his rifle. Chantal flinched at the sound of breaking glass. He kicked over the small table, sending the lamp crashing to the floor. "Please," Chantal begged, the humiliation washing over her even hotter than the fear. "I ordered food. I was just waiting for a burger." "You have the wrong room." "Shut up," the tall officer said. "Save it for the detectives." Chantal fell silent, but tears continued to fall. She felt small and helpless. She was wearing nothing but a white terry cloth robe, handcuffed, surrounded by strange men destroying her belongings. She felt exposed in a way she had never felt in her entire life. It didn't matter that she was a successful executive. It didn't matter that she had a clean record. In this moment, she was treated like less than human. The minutes dragged on, feeling like hours. The officers tore the pillows apart with knives, sending feathers floating into the air like snow. They dumped her suitcase upside down, shaking out her underwear and toiletries onto the dirty carpet. They stepped on her toothbrush. They crushed her perfume bottle. Finally, the tall officer grabbed his radio. "Sector 4 to dispatch. Room is secured. 1 female in custody. Subjects fled the scene prior to entry. No narcotics found yet, but we're still searching." Chantal's heart sank. Asterisk subjects fled. "They thought there were men here?" "Get up," the officer said, grabbing her by the arm and hauling her to her feet. She stumbled, her legs weak from fear and the awkward position of her hands. Her robe loosened slightly, and she frantically tried to shrug it back up with her shoulders, terrified it would fall open. "You're taking me to the station?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We're taking you downstairs," he said. He didn't look her in the eye. He just spun her around and marched her toward the door. As they stepped out of the room, Chantal froze. The hallway, which had been quiet and empty just minutes ago, was now crowded. Doors were cracked open along the corridor. Guests were peeking out, some holding glasses of wine, some just in their pajamas. They were all staring at her. At the black woman in the robe, surrounded by SWAT cops. "Look at that," she heard an older woman whisper from down the hall. "Drugs." Probably a man's voice replied. Chantal wanted to scream, "I am not a drug dealer. I am a person." But the words died in her throat. The grip on her arm tightened, and she was shoved forward. They passed a housekeeping cart, and the maid, a young woman with dark skin, looked at Chantal with a mixture of horror and pity. She quickly looked away, pretending to fold a towel that didn't need folding. They reached the elevators. The officer pressed the button repeatedly. Even though it was already lit, Chantal stared at the numbers counting down from 12. She prayed for the doors to open, but she also dreaded it. She didn't want to go downstairs. She didn't want to walk through the lobby. The bell dinged. The doors slid open. It was empty. The officers shoved her inside. There was no mirror in the elevator, just shiny steel panels. Chantal caught a glimpse of her reflection, distorted eyes, wide face streaked with mascara, hair messy. She looked like a criminal. As the elevator descended, the tall officer spoke into his radio again. "We need a transport unit at the main entrance. We're bringing the suspect out." Suspect, Chantal thought. The word burned into her brain. When the doors opened on the lobby floor, the scene was even worse. The lobby was grand and open, with high ceilings and marble floors. It was full of people checking in, sitting on velvet couches, and eating in the restaurant. The silence that had been there when she arrived was gone. As the officers marched Chantal across the floor, the room went quiet. Conversations stopped. Forks clattered against plates. Every head turned. She felt like a bug under a microscope. She saw a couple holding hands. The man pulled his wife closer, as if Chantal was contagious. She saw a businessman typing on his laptop. He stopped and stared, his mouth slightly open. Chantal kept her head down, staring at the floor, counting the patterns in the marble tile to keep from breaking down. 1, 2, 3, 4. She just needed to get to the car. She just needed to disappear. At the front desk, the clerk who had checked her in earlier was standing there. Her polished smile was gone. She was pale, watching Chantal being paraded past in handcuffs. When their eyes met for a split second, the clerk looked down at her computer screen, refusing to acknowledge her. Chantal felt a fresh wave of anger. This woman had seen her ID, knew her name, knew she was a guest who paid for a room. But now, she was just watching the show. They pushed through the revolving doors and out into the cool night air. There was a police car waiting at the curb, its lights flashing blue and red, reflecting off the glass hotel facade. The lights spun around and around, hypnotic and sickening. "Get in," the officer said, opening the back door. He guided her head with his hand not roughly, but firmly, and pushed her into the back seat. The smell of the car was familiar plastic, stale coffee, and fear. It was the smell of humiliation. As the door slammed shut, the lock clicked automatically. Chantal was trapped in the small cage. She looked out through the metal mesh partition that separated her from the front seat. The officers were standing on the sidewalk, talking and laughing now that the adrenaline was fading. Through the window, she could see people inside the hotel lobby, pressing their faces against the glass, watching her. She saw someone raise a phone, taking a video. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking out the corners. She leaned her head back against the hard plastic seat. "I didn't do anything," she whispered to the empty car. "I didn't do anything." But outside, under the flashing lights, nobody could hear her. To the world watching, she was already guilty. The car ride felt like it lasted a lifetime, but in reality, it was probably only 20 minutes. Chantal sat squeezed into the hard plastic seat, her hands still cuffed behind her back. Every bump in the road made the metal bite into her wrists. She had stopped crying, mostly because she was dehydrated and exhausted. But a heavy lump sat in her throat that refused to go away. She stared out the window, watching the city lights blur by, feeling completely detached from reality. It was like she was watching a movie about someone else's terrible night. When the car finally pulled into the Sally Port of the police, stationed the garage area where the secure doors roll open, the reality of the situation crashed back down on her. The fluorescent lights were harsh, buzzing overhead like angry insects. The officer opened the door and grabbed her arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to let her know she wasn't in control anymore. "Watch your head," said mechanically as he guided her out of the back seat. She walked through the heavy metal doors and the noise hit her. It was a chaotic symphony of ringing telephones. People shouting, keyboards clacking, and the heavy thud of steel doors slamming. The smell was even worse, a mix of old coffee, bleach, sweat, and fear. It was a smell that coated the back of your throat and wouldn't leave. Chantal was marched past the front desk where a few officers were chatting with a civilian. They stopped talking as she walked by, their eyes scanning her up and down. She was still wearing the white hotel robe, now dirty from the floor and spotted with dust. She had no shoes on. Her bare feet were freezing against the cold concrete floor. She felt exposed, tiny, and utterly insignificant. She was taken into a small, windowless room with a bench bolted to the wall. The atmosphere was sterile and cold. "Okay, let's get those off," the officer said, reaching for her wrists. The moment the cuffs clicked open, Chantal let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for hours. She brought her arms around to the front, rubbing her wrists. They were red and raw, circled by deep bruises that were already turning purple. "Am I allowed to make a phone call?" she asked, her voice raspy and weak. The officer didn't look at her. He was filling out a form on a clipboard. "In a minute." "We have to process you first." "Process me?" she asked, panic rising in her chest again. "But I haven't done anything. You raided my room. You broke my door. You found nothing. Why are we doing this?" He finally looked up, his face tired and bored. "We had a credible tip, ma'am. High priority. You were detained on suspicion of drug trafficking and conspiracy. Until we figure out who you are and what your role was, you stay here." "My role?" Chantal almost laughed, but it came out as a sob. "I am a marketing director. I have a job. I have a life. I was ordering a burger." The officer just sighed and pointed to a camera on the wall. "Stand on the yellow line. Look at the camera. Chin up." She went through the motions. They took her photo. She was sure she looked like a nightmare hair, wild eyes red, wearing a robe. They took her fingerprints, pressing each finger onto the glass plate, and then onto the paper cards. The ink was black and sticky. She felt dirty, like the ink was staining her soul, marking her as a criminal even though she knew she was innocent. After what felt like hours, she was led into an interrogation room. It was a small square space with cinder block walls painted a depressing shade of beige. There was a metal table bolted to the floor in the center and 2 chairs on opposite sides. A large mirror covered one wall. She knew from TV shows that it was probably two-way glass. And people were watching her from the other side. "Sit tight," the officer said. "Someone will be in to talk to you." The door clicked shut and she was alone. The silence in the room was heavy. It pressed against her ears. Chantal sat down, putting her head in her hands. Her feet were numb from the cold floor. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to keep warm, trying to hold herself together. She thought about her phone, sitting on the nightstand in the hotel room. She thought about her mother, who would be expecting a call tomorrow morning. She thought about the humiliation of walking through the lobby in a robe. She sat there for what felt like an eternity. Maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour. She started to shiver uncontrollably. Finally, the door opened. A different man walked in. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and a face that looked like it had seen too much. He wasn't wearing a uniform, just a button-down shirt and slacks. He held a thick file folder in his hand. He sat down across from her and opened the folder. He didn't say hello. He didn't apologize for the wait. He just looked at her, his eyes narrowing behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Chantal," he said, reading from a piece of paper. "That's an interesting name." "My name is Chantal Davis," she said, trying to sound strong, but her voice trembled. "I want to know why I am here." The detective leaned back in his chair. "We got a call, Ms. Davis. A very detailed call. Someone said a woman matching your description checked into the Grandview Hotel with a large quantity of heroin and a duffel bag full of cash. They said you were armed and dangerous." Chantal stared at him, her mouth open. "Heroin cash. I don't even drink coffee. I have never touched drugs in my life. You searched my room? You tore it apart. Did you find anything?" "We found clothes," the detective said. "We found a laptop. We found toiletries. No drugs, no money, no gun. So then let me go," she pleaded. "It was a prank. A terrible, sick prank." "It doesn't add up," the detective said, tapping his pen on the table. "Why would someone make up such a specific story about you? People don't usually call on a SWAT team for no reason. Did you have a disagreement with someone lately?" "An ex-boyfriend." "Someone at work?" Chantal's mind raced. "I've been stressed at work. I've had some conflicts, but nothing like this. Nobody hates me enough to do this." "It takes a lot of hate to call the cops on someone," the detective said. "Or a lot of fear. Maybe you're involved in something you shouldn't be, and things went south. Maybe your partners got scared and took off, leaving you holding the bag." "I am not holding any bag." Chantal slammed her hand on the table, tears of frustration springing to her eyes. "I am a victim here. I was assaulted in my hotel room. I was humiliated in public. I was dragged out in a robe with no shoes. And you are treating me like the criminal?" The detective didn't flinch. He just watched her, analyzing her reaction. "I want a lawyer," Chantal said suddenly. She remembered enough from TV to know she needed to stop talking. "I am not answering any more questions until I have a lawyer." The detective sighed, a long, weary sound. He closed the folder. "That is your right. But let me tell you something, Miss Davis. We found nothing in the room. That helps you. But the call we received? It was from a disposable phone. Untraceable. Unless we find something linking this back to a specific person, this is going to be a very hard case to prove. You have to prove I'm innocent." She asked, horrified. "I thought you had to prove I'm guilty." "In the court of law, yes," he said, standing up. "But right now, you're sitting in a police station in a bathrobe. The damage is already done." He walked to the door and knocked on it. It opened immediately. "You can make your phone call now," he said. "But just so you know, we're holding you until we can verify your identity and story. It might take a while." He walked out, leaving the door open. Chantal sat there, shaking. She felt defeated. The detective didn't believe her. He thought she was hiding something. The system wasn't there to help her. It was there to process her. She stood up slowly, her legs wobbly. She walked over to the hallway door where a young officer was waiting. "I need the phone," she said. He pointed her down the hall to a pay phone mounted on the wall. Chantal picked up the receiver. It was greasy and smelled like old hands. She had to call someone, but who? Her parents would freak out. Her friends would panic. She needed someone who could handle this. Someone who wouldn't cry. She thought of her uncle. He was a retired mechanic, a steady, no-nonsense kind of guy. But he lived 3 states away. Then she thought of Ben. He was an old college friend who had gone to law school but wasn't practicing law anymore. He worked in real estate now, but he knew people. He was calm. She dialed the number, her fingers slipping on the buttons. "Hello." A groggy voice answered. "It was 2 o'clock in the morning, Ben," Chantal whispered. And then the dam broke. She couldn't hold the tears back any longer. "It's Chantal. I'm in jail, Chantal." "What, are you okay?" "No," she sobbed, sliding down the wall until she was sitting on the cold floor, the phone cord stretching tight. I'm not okay. They arrested me. I didn't do anything, Ben. Please help me. She could hear him moving on the other end, the sound of bedsheets rustling. Okay, listen to me. Breathe. Where are you? Central Precinct. I need a lawyer. I don't know who to call. I'm coming, Ben said, his voice instantly alert and authoritative. Don't talk to anyone. Don't sign anything. I'm calling a guy I know, a good lawyer named David. We will be there in 30 minutes. Stay strong, Chantal. She hung up the phone and curled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around her legs. She sat in the hallway under the buzzing fluorescent lights, wearing a bathrobe. While officers walked past her, ignoring her existence, she felt smaller than she ever had in her life. But for the first time that night, a tiny flicker of hope sparked in her chest. Help was coming. She just had to survive the waiting. Waiting in the police station felt like sitting in a freezer that smelled like bleach and old coffee. Chantal sat on a hard wooden bench in the hallway, hugging her knees to her chest to preserve whatever little body heat she had left. The robe was thin, and her bare feet were numb against the concrete floor. Every time an officer walked past, she shrank back, expecting them to yell at her or drag her back into a tiny room. But mostly, they just ignored her, looking right through her, as if she was part of the furniture. That was almost worse than the shouting. It made her feel like she didn't matter. Time moved strangely in there. Minutes felt like hours. She watched the clock on the wall tick slowly, the second hand jerking forward with every passing moment. She thought about the mess her room was in. She thought about her laptop sitting on the floor under a pile of feathers from the ripped pillows. She thought about the front desk clerk, seeing her being taken away in handcuffs. The humiliation burned in her chest hotter than the fear. It wasn't just about being arrested. It was about being publicly shamed for a crime she didn't commit. Then, the heavy metal door at the end of the hall buzzed and swung open. A tall man in a sharp gray suit walked in. He didn't look like he belonged in this place. He looked clean, awake, and angry. Behind him was Ben, looking worried and holding a paper bag. Chantal, Ben said, rushing over to her. He knelt down in front of the bench. Are you okay? She looked up at him, her eyes swollen and red. I'm cold, Ben, and I want to go home. The man in the suit stepped forward. He introduced himself as David. He had a briefcase and a no-nonsense look in his eyes. He didn't waste time with sympathy. He was a man on a mission. I need you to tell me exactly what happened, David said, his voice low and steady. Leave nothing out. Start from the moment you checked in. Between sniffles, Chantal told him the story. The check-in, the quiet room, the shower, the order for the burger. She told him about the crash of the door, the guns, the accusations of drugs and money, and the way they tore the room apart. She told him about the interrogation and the detective claiming there was a credible tip. David listened intently, taking notes on a small legal pad. When she mentioned the detective saying the tip came from a disposable phone, he stopped writing. He said that, David asked sharply. He admitted the source was untraceable. Yes, Chantal nodded. He said they couldn't trace the person. He acted like that meant I was guilty. David snapped his notebook shut. That's a violation of protocol. You can't raid a hotel room based on a ghost call without corroboration. Not legally. We're going to get you out of here, but I need to make a call first. David marched up to the duty sergeant at the front desk. Chantal couldn't hear exactly what he was saying, but she saw his hands moving emphatically. She saw the sergeant shaking his head at first, pointing to a file. But David didn't back down. He leaned over the counter, speaking with a quiet intensity that made the sergeant stop typing. He slammed his hand on the counter not loud, but with force. 10 minutes later, the paperwork was done. The arresting officer came out with a key and unlocked the bench. Chantal stood up slowly, her legs stiff. The handcuffs were finally, truly taken off. You're free to go for now, the officer muttered, avoiding eye contact. But don't leave the city. Come on, Ben said, draping his coat over her shoulders. It was heavy and warm, and it smelled like cologne and safety. Let's get you out of here. Outside, the city was waking up. The early morning sky was turning a pale gray, and the streetlights were flickering off. A cab was waiting for them. David sat in the front, and Ben got in the back with Chantal. They didn't take her back to the hotel. She couldn't go back there. The thought of walking into that wrecked room, or seeing the people who watched her get arrested, made her stomach turn. Ben took her to his apartment instead. When they walked in, Ben's girlfriend was waiting with a warm change of clothes, sweatpants, and a soft hoodie. It felt like heaven to put them on. She sat on the sofa while David set up his briefcase on the coffee table. "We need to get to work," David said. "We have a small window before the news cycle picks this up. If this gets out as a drug bust gone wrong, your reputation is dead. We need to control the narrative. What can we do?" Chantal asked, wrapping her hands around a mug of hot tea Ben had made her. They said the phone was untraceable. David pulled out a laptop. "The police have technology to trace calls, but they often look for the easy answer. A disposable phone or burner is harder, but not impossible if you have the right resources. I have a contact, a private investigator who used to work in cybercrimes. I've sent him the time of the call and the case number," typed for a few minutes, then paused. "There's something else." The caller claimed there was a duffel bag of cash. That is a very specific detail to invent. Usually, pranksters just say drugs. Cash implies a business transaction. "Who knew you were going to that hotel?" "Nobody," Chantal said immediately. "I decided to go this morning on a whim. I booked the room myself using my phone. Did you post about it?" "Instagram, Facebook, Twitter." David asked. Shan thought hard. "I posted a picture of the rain from the taxi window, and I messaged my mom to tell her I was safe. But that's it." David narrowed his eyes. "Who else has access to your phone? Or your social media?" Chantal froze. A cold realization trickled down her spine. "At work, we use a shared messaging app for the project team. I might have complained about the stress in the group chat. I might have said I was getting away for the weekend. Who was in that chat?" Ben asked gently. Chantal listed a few names, but there was one name that made her stomach churn. "Stephen, we butted heads all week. He messed up a major presentation, and I had to write him up. He was furious. He screamed at me in front of everyone." "Stephen," David repeated. "Is he the type?" He's manipulative," Chantal said. "He plays the victim. He has a temper. But I never thought he would do this." Just then, David's phone buzzed. He picked it up, listened for a moment, and his face went serious. He hung up and looked at Chantal. "That was my investigator," David said. "The police trace came up empty on the burner phone as expected. But my friend ran a cross-check on the cell tower data from the area where the call originated. The call didn't come from a payphone or a random street corner. It came from a residential building in the suburbs." "Okay," Chantal said, not sure why that mattered. David turned his laptop screen around to show them a map. A red pin was dropped on a neighborhood about 30 minutes outside the city. "This is the address," David said. "It's an apartment complex. And guess who lives in that specific building? Who is listed on the lease for apartment 4B? Chantal looked at the screen. The name was there in black and white. It was a common name, but she knew it. "It's Stephen's address," she whispered. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't a random prank. It wasn't a case of mistaken identity. It was him. The person she had reported for incompetence was the one who had sent a SWAT team to kick down her door. He had weaponized the police force to settle a work grudge. "We need to go to the police with this," Ben said, standing up. "No," David said firmly. "The police won't care. They will say it's circumstantial. A cell tower pinging near a house isn't proof. If we go to them now, they will bury it. We need more. We need to catch him in the act." "How?" Chantal asked. David leaned forward. "If he did this once, he might try again. Or he might have left a digital footprint gloating about it. We need to subpoena his phone records, but I can't do that without a court order. We need to file a civil lawsuit against him immediately. It forces him to answer questions under oath." Chantal looked at Ben, then back at David. She was still tired, her feet were still sore, and her heart was still broken. But for the first time all night, The fear was replaced by something else. Anger. White-hot, burning anger. "Do it," Chantel said, her voice gaining strength. "Sue him. I don't care how much it costs. I want him to pay for what he did." David nodded and opened his briefcase again. "Then let's get to work." She sat there, sipping her tea, watching the lawyer type out the first pages of the lawsuit. She was no longer the victim in the hotel room. She was fighting back. And she was going to win. The sunlight streaming through the blinds of Ben's apartment felt harsh and strange to Chantel. It had been 2 days since the night at the hotel. 2 days of hiding, of crying, of feeling like her life had been put through a shredder. But today was different. Today, she wasn't hiding. She stood in front of the full-length mirror in Ben's guest room. She wasn't wearing a hotel robe or sweats. She was wearing a sharp, navy blue pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back, sleek and tight. She looked professional. She looked strong. Even though her hands were trembling slightly as she adjusted her collar, she looked like a person who demanded respect.
You ready?"
Ben asked from the doorway. He held a cup of coffee out to her. Chantel took the cup. The warmth helped settle her nerves. As ready as I'll ever be. The car ride to the press conference was quiet. David, her lawyer, was in the front seat reviewing his notes. He had been working nonstop for 48 hours, filing motions, collecting evidence, and coordinating with the private investigator. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp, remember David said, turning slightly to look at her. "Keep your answers short. Don't get emotional. Let the evidence do the shouting. The media is here because they smell blood, but we are going to feed them the steak, not the sizzle." When they arrived at the location, David had chosen a small park across the street from the police station. The crowd was bigger than Chantel expected. There were news vans with satellite dishes on top, reporters holding microphones with different channel logos, and cameramen setting up tripods. As soon as she stepped out of the car, flashes started going off like lightning. For a second, panic flared in her chest. She remembered the cell phone videos taken of her in the hotel lobby. She felt exposed again. But then she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the small podium they had set up. Ben walked right behind her, and David stood to her side. David stepped up to the microphones first. The crowd quieted down. "Thank you for coming," David began. "We are here today to discuss the events that occurred at the Grandview Hotel 2 nights ago involving my client, Chantel Davis. As you know, she was arrested in a humiliating, violent raid based on a tip of drug trafficking and armed threats." He paused, looking around at the reporters. "However, the police found no drugs, no money, no weapons. They found a woman in a bathrobe who had simply ordered room service. Today, we are filing a massive civil rights lawsuit against the police department for their failure to verify a credible threat before raiding a hotel room." A murmur went through the crowd. This was what they wanted to hear. But David held up a hand to silence them. "But that is not the whole story," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "This wasn't just a mistake. This was a targeted attack." He nodded to Chantel. She stepped up to the podium. Her hands gripped the edges. She looked out at the sea of cameras. "For months, I have been working in a high-stress environment," Chantel said, her voice clear and steady. "I reported a colleague, Stephen, for incompetence and racial discrimination. He was angry. He threatened me. But I never thought he would go this far." David took over again. "We have obtained cell tower data that proves the anonymous tip came from within 500 feet of Stephen's apartment. But we needed more. We needed to prove intent." He pulled a printed transcript from his folder. 2 hours ago, we served a warrant on Stephen's social media accounts. We found messages sent to a friend the night of the raid. Messages where he bragged about what he did. David didn't read the whole thing, but he quoted the line that mattered. "*em calling in a favor. Gonna teach her a lesson? She won't know what hit her." The room exploded. Questions were shouted from all directions. Did he confess? Is he under arrest? What are the charges? David held up a hand. "Because of the pressure from this impending lawsuit and the evidence we uncovered, the police department has reversed its position. They are no longer viewing Chantel as a suspect. As of 1 hour ago, a warrant was issued for Stephen's arrest. Chantal felt a wave of dizziness. It was actually happening. He wasn't going to get away with it. She didn't go to the station to see him get booked. She didn't need to see him in handcuffs to feel better. She knew it was happening. Instead, she went back to the hotel. It felt strange walking into the Grand View lobby. The same clerk was behind the desk. She looked up and saw Chantal, and her face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, probably to apologize, but Chantal just walked past her. She didn't have time for fake apologies now. She took the elevator up to the 12th floor. She stopped in front of room 1204. The door was new. The wood still unpainted, where the frame had been replaced. It looked a little jarring against the rest of the hallway. She used her new key card to open the door. The room was clean. The hotel staff had put everything back together. The bed was made with fresh linens. The pillows were new. The feathers were gone. The glass from the minibar was replaced. The room looked exactly like it had when she first checked in. It was peaceful again. But Chantal knew she would never be able to sleep in this room again. The memory was too loud. She walked to the window and looked out at the city. It was the same view she had admired 2 days ago, but she saw it differently now. She wasn't just a tiny speck in a big world anymore. She had a voice, and people were listening. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from David. Asterisk, headline news. Chief of Police held a press conference. They are launching an internal investigation into the raid. And Stephen just gave a statement to the press, claiming it was a prank. Asterisk, Chantal smiled. A prank? That was his defense? That was going to destroy him in court. She packed her small bag. She didn't have much to take, just her laptop and the book she had brought. She took one last look around the room to make sure she hadn't left anything. She looked at the spot on the floor where she had been handcuffed. She looked at the spot on the bed where she had sat waiting for food. She walked out of the room and closed the door gently. Downstairs in the lobby, the atmosphere had changed completely. The manager was waiting for her. He looked nervous. He was wringing his hands together. "Miss Davis," he said, stepping in front of her. We have seen the news. I want to personally apologize for the way you were treated." The police forced their way in. "We didn't know." Chantal looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes. He was worried about a lawsuit. He was worried about bad reviews. "I appreciate that," Chantal said calmly. "But you didn't check on me? You watched them take me away. You let me sit in jail overnight without calling anyone." The manager swallowed hard. "We want to make it right. We are issuing a full refund, of course. And we would like to offer you a complimentary stay in our presidential suite whenever you wish." Attell almost laughed. "I won't be staying here again," she said softly. "But you can make a donation in my name to the local legal aid fund. That would be a good start." The manager nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. We will do that." Chantal turned and walked out the front doors. The doorman opened the taxi door for her. She slid into the back seat. "Where to?" the driver asked. Chantal looked back at the hotel one last time. It was just a building. It was just bricks and glass. It didn't have any power over her. "Home," she said. "Take me to my apartment." As the taxi pulled away, she saw her phone light up with notifications. It was the news. She saw a screenshot of a police car parked outside an apartment building. She saw a headline, "Asterisk suspect arrested in hotel raid hoax." Asterisk, she leaned back against the seat and let out a long breath. The nightmare was over. The ending had shocked everyone, just like David said it would. The victim wasn't the criminal. The criminal was the one who thought he could use the system to hurt her. She looked out the window at the people, walking on the sidewalk. They were going to work, buying coffee, living their lives. Chantal closed her eyes. She was going to go home, take a long shower in her own bathroom, and sleep for as long as she wanted. And when she woke up, she was going to go back to work, head held high, knowing that she had survived the worst night of her life and come out on top.